Alrighty, welcome to our City Council meeting this evening for January 12th, 2022. Appreciate those in attendance today and those that might be joining us virtually this evening. We will get started with a Pledge of Allegiance that tonight will be offered by Chris Berbert.
Will everyone please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Berbert. We will now move on to item 4.2, City Council comments and recognitions. Anything from the council this evening?
I just want to say thank you. This is my first time sitting up here in this chair, in this seat, and I want to thank the citizens that voted me in. Also, this amazing council and staff that's here. It's going to be an amazing term for the next 4 years, and I think we're going to be very, very frugal and get a lot of work done throughout the city, and you'll see some great things come out of this council, especially in the next few months as we get the ball rolling, and I appreciate the commitment of our citizens and the trust in me for that process. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Hodges. Down here?
I'll say ditto on that.
And I will likewise then. Okay, is that it? Anything else from the council? Okay, with that, we will move on to item 5, our public comment portion of the evening. And I'll just read a summary here of how to go about public comment. Audience members may bring any item to the City Council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this meeting will also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the City Council may submit a comment by emailing recorder@harriman.org or by visiting harriman.org/agendas and minutes, where there will be a link to the electronic meeting to submit a written comment. Your statement will be incorporated into the public record. So with that, we'll go ahead and open the public comment. You'll just step forward and state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Pedro Martins. I live at 5674 West Cottage Row Circle. I was just following along with you guys through the work meeting at home. And the reason I'm here today is I just wanted to keep or remind you guys that there are several homeowners who are waiting for you guys to make a decision on the accessory building changes, myself being one of them. I went through the process of actually going to the city, getting advice from the city before I even went to an architect to have a building drawn up to be an accessory building. You know, thought I was doing the right thing. The city, when I then came back, basically told me, sorry, we gave you bad advice. You can't do what we told you you could do. And I found several other homeowners in the same situation that I'm in, and I'm almost a year into this. We got to be better about being more efficient. I'm seeing the same thing happening today's work meeting that happened in Planning Commission. There's too many cooks in the kitchen, and nobody can agree on anything. There's a ton of opinions, and it's just frustrating as a homeowner. My backyard is nothing but dirt. I haven't done anything to it because it's got to get torn up to run power and gas to heat the building. And until you guys come up with a decision, I'm still in that same boat, right? And it's just frustrating as a homeowner when you try to do the right thing and you just kind of get mired in politics. And I wish I had put my politician's hat on and gone and requested to visit with each one of you prior to tonight's meeting. I get the concerns that were brought up. They make sense, but man, we gotta do better. That's all I guess I have to say today. Just please, let's not drag this out for another 6 months. Please take the time to go do your research, talk to the planning department, and let's make this quick. There's a lot of us waiting. There's people that I've met through this process that have spent lots of money, and we're told, sorry, we gave you bad advice, but that's your problem. So let's do better. Thank you.
Thanks, Pedro.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jessica Fry. I'm a resident in the Skyridge Townhomes. I live at 4312 West Nash Lane. You guys have been working with our homeowners association. We're really grateful for the time that you've given. I'm specifically talking about discussion item 10.1. We're really excited to move forward with this. Right now it's a dirt lot. We'd love to be able to develop that, make it a little bit more beautiful in our community, add some parking spaces that we desperately need. So we're hoping that you guys, this is the meeting where you kind of stamp that and approve it. We've already have our plans drawn, it's funded, we're ready to proceed, and we're just kind of hoping that tonight's the night that you guys are ready to approve that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jackie, anything electronically? Okay, perfect. Okay, with that being said, we will close the public comment portion of our meeting. We'll move on to item 6, City Council Board and Committee reports.
So we had our first meeting today for the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, and things are pretty good. I was able to attend the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting in Vegas in December, and we should all be really concerned about the severity of the drought. It's easy to watch these nice snowfalls that we've had and feel like we're having a good water year, and we are. So far, our water year has just started, but we're a long ways away from being out of this drought. We have Lake Mead and Lake Powell, which we think, well, gosh, we're way upstream of that, but we have to send water to them. And so they're at about 30% capacity, and if you've ever been to Lake Mead and Lake Powell, maybe you can start comprehending the volume of water that truly is to think that you're down 70% on those reservoirs. So we have to have substantial snowpack for a few years to ever really start making a dent in this drought that we've been experiencing. October was great. We had a lot of moisture in October. November was terrible. December was great, and now January is kind of shaping up to be not so very good on moisture. So we need to continue along our lines of not just drought tolerance, but conservation. So I hope that we'll all continue the good habits that we're starting to form during, there was a lot of emphasis put on the drought during this last summer. People were, scaling back on water use and things like that. And I just hope that as we roll into this next water year, people continue to understand that we really have to continue to conserve. We're the second driest state in the union. That's not going away. And so we continue to grow exponentially with our population, and so we really have to continue down the conservation path and really make sure that we're doing things as a city. We need to look into the things that we're doing to, flip our strips, and as residents, really look into those things. The district, I took all these notes on my phone, and I left my phone home. The district has a lot of really good classes that they offer for localscapes, things like that. They have a class that's coming up just in a couple of weeks that it's actually for landscapers that will help them understand conservation practices and things like that. It's more of a business class for professionals to come and do that, but they have a ton of classes that are available both online and in person for people to learn how to prune your trees or learn how to, do a lot of localscape water efficiency type of things. So I would just encourage people to look into those and participate in those, because I think it will go a long ways in helping to promote conservation.
Thank you, Sherry.
Just real quick from Unified Fire Authority. I know I've said this a few times prior council, but I want to make sure you guys are aware. Going through the budgeting process, Finance Committee meeting last month, they went through several things, which some will affect the city as well. URS is anticipating actually a 1% reduction in their costs this year, so that will be good for everybody. But inflation's up. They've done a roughly 3% increase in wages for CPI, et cetera. Inflation's just a fact of life for all of us, especially in organizations that are labor intensive, right? That's the service that's provided. So expect that. They're estimating, I mean, fuel costs, all those sorts of things, you know, they're anticipating, what we're planning on right now is about a 5.5% member fee increase. So now that we're not part of UFSA, right, that's passed on directly to us in dollar terms that we have to look at for that taxing district going forward. That's all.
Thank you, Jared. Councilman Shields, anything?
Just by way of information, no other reason is I am serving as chair of the Association of Municipal Councils this year. So, well, at least for the last meeting. We'll see how tonight goes.
We can put a quick end to that.
Exactly. Spare them all.
And I don't know, hopefully this is the right time to say this. I just a couple of meetings, and the good thing about being newly elected is everybody wants to meet with you. So we've taken, and Nathan and I especially have taken advantage of a couple opportunities. We did meet with Rio Tinto this week, trying to reestablish some relationships there to help with that relationship, as they are a significant landowner to the west of us. And then we were invited out to the Academy, the RSL Academy building this past week to meet with the new ownership group for RSL. That'll have huge impact for our community, believe it or not. They want to get more involved in the community. They recognize that they haven't done a lot in the community. They want us to kind of take ownership of that team a little bit, since they are in our community. There's very few cities in the state that have a professional team in their city, and they want us to partner with them and see what we can do to fill that stadium every week. And lastly, Councilman Hodges and I both met with, we went to a couple of the swearing-in ceremonies, especially Bluffdale City, and I'll bring this up at a further point, but that their council is very interested in working with our council to just coordinate better on some connectivity issues in the valley, just anything we can do with that relationship there as well, which I thought was very promising also. So just a few things along that line. So anything else before we move on? Okay, with that, we will move on to item 7.1, presentation of the annual financial audit. Turn it over to Mr. Ray.
We've completed our audit and we've submitted it to the state at this point. Our auditor, McKay Hall from Burdick Company, is here to report the audit. We did receive an unqualified opinion again this year, or the equivalent of that, meaning that they found no material errors in our statements. So it's one of the things I'd like to share with you as part of this audit presentation is that one of the findings that they had this year is that we had completed our fraud risk assessment, but we had not shared it with you. And so I'd like to just show that to you really quickly here before we move into letting McKay review the, and you can see it on your screen ahead of you. This is just essentially the cover page of a very much larger one, which you have the entire fraud risk assessment, but it looks at our policies, it looks at our training, our background to make sure that we, what our risk of having fraud happen in our city is. We finished with 355 points on their survey, which is a very low risk calculation. There's 395 is the total possible available. There's a couple of things we need to look at in improving this score, and those two things. In fact, let me take that back. We can look at all of these and see how we can improve them, but the two we're missing are a tip hotline that people can call and give tips if they know of fraud or misappropriation and so forth. So we've got that. The other one is we do not have currently a written policy for internal controls. we have a pretty good set of internal controls, but we don't have, when I said internal controls, I mean internal audit. We don't have a formal internal audit program at this point. Those are the two things that we are missing on here. Everything else we graded fully on this. We've submitted it to the state. But it is one of the things that was a finding in our audit, that we didn't share this with you. Now, you have all the background, and you can see one of the items on here was those tests that you had to take with the state auditor that we got the certificates for, and that Lauren and Teddy will need to go through and get certified. But when we go through, there's a number of policies. There's a number of things that look at our background as far as, do we have CPAs on staff? Do we have people with at least bachelor's degree in doing our finances? And currently we have 2 CPAs and 3 with at least masters or bachelors, 2 with masters working on our finances. So we're covering what they require. They look at whether or not we're getting our continuing education, and then how do we interact with the employees if there is a suspected fraud. So anyhow, we rate low on their scale. We'll be looking at some of these things to try and improve them this next year. Plus, see if we can't add these other 2 items in there in some way that we can qualify for the remaining points. So with that, I would like to turn the time over to McKay, allow him to share with you the results of the audit. Now, I give each one of you a printed copy of the audit. Now, you'll notice that it's an annual comprehensive financial report this year rather than a comprehensive annual financial report, because apparently that acronym for the comprehensive annual financial report has a negative connotation in some parts of the world. So the GF, or the Government Accounting Standards Board, changed the name of the report. Now, we do the comprehensive report, which includes quite a bit more than what a standard financial report includes. And that is to give us background and context to what we're giving you in the standard reports. So we do the entire thing, and it's a bigger process, but I think it's, as it says, comprehensive and gives you some context for it. With that,
Alan, if I could just ask one question.
Okay.
In regards to the audit, the 2 items that we didn't score on, specifically the idea of an FWA hotline kind of a thing. What is the current thoughts of how we would address that? Who would receive those reports? How would that be handled? Or is this something that we're going to bring back for discussion? I'd kind of like to understand a little bit more.
Well, it's something that we want to look at. Nathan and I talked about it briefly the other day. We're trying to figure out the best way to do it, because typically in both of our experience with it is you put that hotline out and it becomes a gripe line, and it's not, doesn't turn out to be exactly what you put it together for. And so we want to kind of look at some options, look at some other cities and see if there's a good way to do it. Now, as far as an internal audit, we are working on that currently in part of moving budget responsibilities to Justin is such that I can take more time to do the internal audit stuff, and that's what I'm working on right now as he's doing budget. So, but we've got to write the policy of how we're going to address that. But so
Okay, I just on those things, I'd love to hear feedback as to how that's progressing and what your solutions are.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. As Alan said, my name is McKay Hall. I'm an audit partner with Hinton Burdick. We perform the city's annual financial audit. Now, I may have told you in prior years, but as I started out my career, I started out in IT, working with systems development and management. And after about 10 years in IT, I thought, you know, I'm just not a very interesting person. So I need to find a way to spice up my personality. So I thought I'd become a CPA. So just be forewarned. I am grateful for the opportunity to be here this evening. I'd also like to commend your city staff. Going through a financial audit, especially as you start to gain some size to the organization, takes a lot of effort and commitment to go through and do. And your city personnel, from what we've seen, are really committed to making sure that things are done properly, and they put in the time to make sure that things get done. And the assistance that they provide in the audit, we really appreciate. So I wanted to commend them and express our gratitude there. So for the presentation this evening, I'll basically go through and talk real quickly about what it is that we do with the financial audit, what the results of the financial audit were. We'll touch on one or two key indicators, things for you to watch over time, and then we'll run through some 5-year trend analysis for your major funds in the financial statement. As we go along, if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up, let me know. We'll give you the information that we have and get your questions answered. So, for the financial audit, when we come in and we do a financial audit, our responsibilities are listed in this slide. And they are to express an opinion on the financial statements based on our audit. Standards we follow require that we plan and perform the audit to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement. So a material misstatement would be a misstatement that would cause a reasonable user of the financial statements to change their opinion. So if somebody were looking at it and said, oh, well, Herriman put out some bonds. Do I want to invest in these bonds? They look at the financial statements to come to an understanding of the city's financial status and situation. If there was a misstatement in the financial statements that would make them say, I don't want to invest, as opposed to I do want to invest, that would be a material misstatement because it would change the opinion of a reasonable user of the financial statements. So that is what we look for when we conduct the audit. The standards that we conducted our audit in accordance with are the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States. And also, since you're a local government, the standards applicable to financial audits contained in the government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller of the United States. So, financial audit, something to keep in mind is that part of the audit, we come in and we take a look at internal controls. We are not auditing the internal controls. That's not the point of the financial audit. But we do come in to get an understanding of what the internal controls are and whether or not it appears that they are operating as designed. That helps us to understand the situation, the circumstances, the framework for the city, and helps us in our planning of the financial audit. When we go through and conduct the audit, we take a look at the financial statements and the information that comes from the accounting system that then rolls into the financial statements. And we perform testing. We run through confirmations, we run through analytics, we tie to supporting documentation, provided some from within the city, some from outside of the city. And these are the things samples and analytics. So we don't test every single transaction, but we go through and perform a risk analysis to see where the most likely areas with the highest risk are going to be. And then those are the areas that get the largest amount of focus as we go through and do it. Findings, as we go through and conduct the audit, if we do find anything with internal controls where there appears to be a weakness, either a material weakness, which would allow a material misstatement to be processed through with a high likelihood of not being caught by the processes and controls you have, that would be a material misstatement. Or significant deficiencies, which, like material misstatements, would allow a material issue to go through, but there's a much lower likelihood that that would occur. Those are significant deficiencies. And then there are other items as well, things that we notice where we might have recommendations or suggestions for the city. We provide in an other items letter that's addressed to management. The audit reports that were issued, we issue the audit report on the financial statements, found on pages 27 through 29. As Alan noted, we're issuing an unmodified or a clean opinion this year. So based on our test work, everything we've seen, The information in the financial statements is materially correct, and you can rely upon it to go through and make your judgments and decisions as a council. That information is materially correct. We also issue what's sometimes known as a Yellow Book report. It's a report on compliance and on internal controls over financial reporting. It's on pages 155 through 156. And that's where we note for you, in summary, any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that are noted in the course of the audit. And then there's an additional letter that's given that gives more detail on what those are. But they are listed in that report, that Yellow Book report, on pages 155 through 156. And then there's also a state compliance report on page 165, and we're happy to note that there were no material findings there. We're also issuing an unqualified or a clean opinion on the state compliance report as well. One or two of the highlights, things to watch: total net position, which is in effect the equity for your city. In short, those are the resources that you have built up over time that you can use to meet the demands, the needs of the city. And the equity, the net position for the city was that $521 million as of June 30. Excuse me, that did not get updated, 2021. It was as of June 30, 2021. And that can be found on page 44. The total net position increased by $75.4 million from the prior year. In the governmental activities, $64.7 million was the increase there, and then the remainder of that $10.7 million was an increase in your proprietary, your utility funds, your water funds, and your stormwater fund. The classification of net position is also a good one to watch. Net invested in capital assets is the resources that you have tied up in your capital assets that haven't been fully depreciated yet. So if you buy $100 million worth of capital assets this year, road on the ground or equipment, then that's been tied into your net invested in capital assets would go up $1 million. It's important to watch because those are resources that you have, but they're not easily turned into cash. They're tied up in those capital assets. So it's a good one to watch. Your restricted net position is $34.7 million as of June 30, 2021. That's an important one to watch as well because that's the cash, the various resources that have come in that have to be used for specific purposes. Your use of those is pretty limited. It's been restricted. And then your unrestricted was $38.3 million as of June 30, 2021. And those are the resources that you have that you can use anyway as seems appropriate for you. You have full control over those. So it's important to watch because over time, the flow of that net position is a pretty good indicator for the health of the city. You know, some years it's going to go up, some years it'll go down. And the allocation between the net invested in capital assets, the restricted, the unrestricted, that'll fluctuate too. But it's over time, it really ought to be increasing. Just through the natural growth, inflation, and those sorts of things, you should see that increasing. So it's a good one to watch over time. The 5-year analysis, this is the general fund balance sheet. Over the last 5 years, it's had a pretty healthy growth. It's in a northeasterly direction overall. You will notice that this last year, it did take a decrease from 2020 to 2021. So that really, if you notice the blue line across the top is the assets. And so as of June 30, 2020, there was $15.8 million in assets. The liabilities you've got to pay out, those were $11 million. And then your net position or your equity was $4.8 million. So there was a pretty big decrease in assets this year, but there was a corresponding decrease in liabilities as well. So even though there was that big decrease in assets, it's not really so concerning because really what happened was the liabilities ended up being settled and they came down as well. Okay, the restricted cash for the general fund. Again, it's the same sort of trend as we were seeing with the assets overall. Again, the cash that was in 2020 was mostly due to the liabilities. There were some impact fees that had to be spent as well. And so there was some restricted cash last year, that $97,066, but it came down this year. And the cash came down as those liabilities were settled as well. In the revenue and expenditure side of things, so the general fund is expected to break even over time. You're not really trying to build up a lot of equity in the general fund. You're supposed to be using the resources to meet the needs of the citizens. So over time, we expect to see revenues to exceed expenses in some years and expenses to exceed revenues in other years. You should see them going back and forth over time, which is what we're seeing here. That line with the squares that starts out on the bottom in 2017 is your expenditures. And so the revenues exceeded expenditures those first 2 years. Year 3, they were pretty close to each other. And then the last 2 years, the expenditures were more than the revenues. So over time, if your expenditures are always coming in more than your revenues, that's going to be a problem. But back and forth is no problem. So this trend is reasonable. I keep hitting the back button, I apologize. Significant revenues for the city in the general fund. We've got 6 of them. This slide looks at the sales tax, the license and permits, the charges for service. The charges for service is that green line. Across the bottom, if you take a look, over time, it's had a little bit of up and down, but it's reasonably consistent growth. Over the last 5 years, there's been a total 43% increase there. The blue line, your sales tax, has really gone up over the last 5 years, with a significant increase over the last 2. And that actually has been fairly typical with most of the municipalities we've been seeing. So I don't know if it's because with the pandemic and everybody cooped up at home, they decided to do a lot more shopping, and so sales tax went up significantly. But that's good because your sales tax it's not one that's likely to disappear on you anytime soon. The other line here, the license and permits, is one to watch. As the city goes through a phase of expansion and construction, the license and permit fees generally go up and will run pretty high. Beginning in 2019, your permits, your growth started to slow a little bit, your rate of growth started to slow a little bit, and the permits and fees started coming down as well. So it's good that your sales tax is going up, because as the permits and licenses come down, which is expected as construction and growth starts to slow, it's good to have that other revenue source starting to increase to give you the resources that you need. The other 3 revenues, significant revenues, property taxes, franchise taxes, and intergovernmental. So the intergovernmental are going to be grants and funding from other local governments. It's that green line that really kind of mountain peaks there. It starts out at 1.2 million in 17. It jumps up in 19 to that 3.3 million. It took a little bit of a dip there in 2020, and then it's up to 4.7 in 2021. That really is just the result of various grants that came in. In 2019, there was a substantial state grant that wasn't repeated. And then with the CARES funding and the ARPA funding that's coming in, that's going to continue to be a pretty high number over the next year or 2, but then we'd expect it to start coming back down again. It's going to fluctuate year to year, just depending on the grants and the funding. Your franchise taxes have been fairly consistent with reasonable growth over the last 5 years. And then your property taxes as well. You can see there's not a lot of variance there. It's been a pretty steady increase. The Safety Enforcement Fund is a blended component unit of the city. It began in 2019, so for 2017, 2018, there's no information there because it wasn't there. 2019, 2021, you can see it's pretty consistent. Its revenues and expenses are fairly consistent with each other and have been pretty steady over the last 3 years. The safety area started this last year, and so the first 4 years are showing a 0. There was no information there. As you can see, it's up to the 2.7 in revenue this year with 2.5 million in expenses. And then we'd expect that over the next few years, there would probably be some growth, but ought to remain fairly consistent. Though that's going to depend on and be driven by the activity and what ends up happening there. So, the Town Center CDA SAA is also another major fund. The expenditures were pretty high in 2017. Given that type of a fund, that's not unusual. But as you can see, the expenses have come back down. They're pretty consistent with the revenues. So the activity is right in line with what we were expecting to see. The Capital Project Fund, again, with Capital Project Fund, because of the capital projects, your revenues and your expenses will change year to year. Their expenses were quite a bit more than revenues in 4 of the last 5 years. In 2021, the revenue did exceed the expenditures, which is good. It's also worth noting that it's funded the expenditures in the prior years in part with a loan from the water fund. And so you're going to want to make sure that either your revenues begin to significantly exceed your expenditures to build up the amount that'll need to be paid back to the water fund, or you'll want to see what other repayment mechanism you're going to want to use to repay that loan when it comes due. The water fund is a proprietary fund. It's your major fund in the proprietary category. Revenues and expenses, these are your operating revenues and expenses. As a proprietary fund, it really needs to be run as a business. And it's got infrastructure, which is going to have to be replaced over time. So if you look in the financial statements and you look at the bottom line, you'll see that it's not been running a loss in total because there are other funding that's been coming into the fund to offset the losses, the operating losses that the fund has had over the last 5 years. But it's something to take a look at because over time you're going to need to get your operating revenues over your operating expenses. You'll either need to bring up your revenues or decrease your expenses because you'll need to have a net operating income, a net income or profit from the operations in order to build up those resources that will be needed at some point to replace the infrastructure, take care of that. So that would be a good one to watch. These last 2 years have been a lot better. The revenues and the expenses have been pretty close. So that's a good start, it's a good trend, but it needs to, at some point, it needs to continue on so that there is a net income coming in from operations in the water fund. And I know that this is the most exciting thing you have on the agenda tonight, so I hope that made sense. Are there any questions?
Doesn't look like it, McKay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. If, as I've said in prior years, if you wake up at 2 in the morning with that burning question, you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. Even at 2 in the morning, though I may not be real responsive at that time.
Let me make one quick comment before we finish. One of the things you saw in the slides that he showed was our cash and our fund position coming down significantly in the general fund. Okay, as you remember, we intentionally took $2.4 million out of the general fund to start the fire district. That money is going to come back at some point. So you're actually seeing a $1.7 million reduction in fund balance, but we took 2.4, so we've started building it back already. But as we get that money in, which has largely come in at this point, we're going to start putting that back, so you'll see a reversal of that reduction that you see in fund balance and cash in the general fund.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and I commend you for your work. I think our finance department does a tremendous job, so thank you.
Thanks, McKay.
And thanks, McKay, for being here,
Okay, thank you very much.
as always. Okay, we'll move on to item 8.1, public hearing and consideration of an ordinance adjusting mayor and city council compensation. And first, we're going to start with Jackie.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to just remind you, in 2018, staff was actually tasked with going through and looking at the compensation practices for the mayor and city council. And at that time, the council determined to make changes to their salaries to commiserate with their respective responsibilities. In December of 2021, council members had requested we revisit those as some of those responsibilities are switching back to the mayoral position. In December, staff noticed for a public hearing tonight for the council to discuss and consider changing the salaries as they wanted. What I had prepared was just basically suggesting that the mayor's salary went back to what it was prior to the 2018 change, which was $24,000. However, the council can, after a public hearing, can determine what those rates should be. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I just recommend having a public hearing to start the process.
Any questions? Thanks, Jackie. Okay, this time then we will open the public comment period, and the same kind of rules apply, the 2 minutes for this as well. So if you have any public comments on this, feel free to step forward and state your name. Okay, seeing none, I will look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Sherry, second by Jared. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Go ahead, any discussion on this item?
Glad to be at this point. I agree with Jackie's recommendation to move it back to where it was and shift those responsibilities back to the mayor.
I think it's important to clarify that when we went through and made the salary adjustments in the first place, it was based off of, Travis had done a study about different councils and different areas and try to bring our current council up to more of a median level position. And that's why everyone was bumped up to the 14.5, I think it is, from the 9,000. And so that change was made a long time ago, but then at the same time, because we were all, we felt like we needed to make the change on the mayoral position, he was brought to the same salary as the rest of the council. But because I believe that you will be having a lot more of those responsibilities that traditionally the mayor was going to have, it makes sense to bring yours up to what at that time would have put you in the middle, salary range also.
It's probably a good time to remind people that our form of government is slightly different than our surrounding cities, right? Or a 5-member council, the mayor is an at-large member of that council. He's not an executive. So I guess I shouldn't name, I'm looking at Jackie, she can make sure I don't misspeak. But some of our surrounding cities have a it's not a 6-member council, but a 6-member council, but the mayor is non-voting unless it's a tie. Right, and that mayor actually has executive powers. Our mayor does not have executive powers. It's just one voting member of the council. So at that time, unanimously, aside from the mayor, we decided to take some responsibilities away from that position and delegate it amongst the council, and felt that we needed to change that compensation to be commensurate with that. And now we're going back to where it was, if that says it well enough.
I'm sorry, Mayor, can I interject? I failed to mention that this change would also need to have a budget amendment to reflect this change in salaries. So we would look, if this is approved, we would look to have a budget amendment at the next meeting.
Good for motion?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one.
Sam,
quick comment.
you look like you want to say something.
Just one last quick thing. This is a restoration. It's not making any changes that aren't appropriate in line with what the mayor's responsibilities and compensation should be prior to adjustments that the council had made.
In fact, if we did
Couple years ago,
if we
yeah.
did that same comparison study again.
So this
we would
is restoring those that full salary and authority back to the mayor's office, which I think is appropriate. Just by way of comment, the compensation that we receive as members of the council, I think I've calculated it out. It works out about $3 an hour.
less for me.
Less. It's probably the least I get paid for the amount of work that we have to put in. So I'm really grateful for the time that all my fellow council members have to put in, and with boards, committees, meetings, readings, all the stuff. I mean, this week's packet was short. It was only 390 pages or something. Usually they're 600, 700, 800 pages.
I was laughing
we gotta
because
get
both
through.
these guys had made comments to me. This is gonna be such a long meeting. I'm like, you have no idea.
Yeah. But one of the things that I would be uncomfortable with is ever being put in a position to vote for myself as a raise. And I feel bad that our mayor in his very first meeting is put in a position to have a vote for that. But I think he should vote enthusiastically for that, because I think that office really does have some additional responsibilities that are commensurate with that. However, I wouldn't have a problem voting for additional compensation for council members, for future council members, not for myself. After being in this office for a couple of years and realizing the amount of time and effort that goes in, I think that there should probably be a more periodic review of what that median compensation is and trying to keep in line with that. So just some additional comments there.
Yeah, and Steve, you pointed it out before, it's not technically a raise, it's just a reinstatement of what it should be or should have been at that time in 2018. And so I'm in favor of it as well, so.
Okay, are you making it?
Right, now I'll make motion to approve ordinance number 2022-01, changing the salary of the mayor.
I'll second that.
Motion by Jared, second by Steve. We'll go to a vote. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. I appreciate it, you guys. Thank you so much. That motion is approved 5-0. Is that good, Jackie? Perfect, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Look for a motion or any changes.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by Jared. Go through a vote. Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That motion is approved unanimously. Move on to item 10.1. Discussion and consideration of a request from Skyridge Townhomes HOA to improve and use Herriman City property located at 4345 West Sykes Lane for the purpose of adding a parking lot improvement.
Thank you, Mayor. This was one that the public comment was on earlier, so just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. And this item, the HOA approached city staff some time ago, several months ago, about a piece of property next to their subdivision that was unmaintained, unused, and currently owned by the city. The location, this presentation will look familiar to a few of you, but a couple new ones, so we'll go through it. The location shown on the map, it's just up on the end of Juniper Crest where that road currently ends in the Rosecrest subdivision. The parcel in discussion here is the yellow parcel shown on the map. You can see there is a trail highlighted by the brown line that will cross the future extension of Juniper Crest. And then there's a stormwater detention basin located kind of to the south and to the east of this parcel. As I said, this parcel is included in the Rosecrest Master Development. You can see here where it's highlighted that it was shown as open space on their most recently approved land use plan. And one of the discussion points, as this was discussed in work meeting, was what does this, if this were to be sold or surplus to the HOA, what would this do to the open space calculations for the overall subdivision? It's adjacent to Pod 33. Pod 33 is the Skyridge development. And you can see that the Skyridge, let me back up. When Rosecrest did the open space calculations, they did the main open space like Juniper Canyon and this piece, but they didn't include the open space inside of each one of the subdivisions in their calculations. According to the Master Development Agreement, the clubhouse, the areas around that could count as open space. In addition, there's a park with a pavilion that would count as open space in their MDA. So you would be taking 0.59 acres out of the open space, but replacing the open space inside with about 2.4. So and the story is it doesn't affect the open space in overall Rosecrest subdivision by removing this. Here's some photos that were taken. I think this was in December before it snowed. Got out there a couple days before it really happened. And you can see the slope is a little rocky. It's got natural vegetation on it. There aren't any improvements along this slope. There are a few utilities that run adjacent and across this parcel. There was a water meter that we noticed had been ran over and broken. And you can see the parcel is currently being used as a parking area by the residents, I would assume, in this area. The request from the HOA, you can see on this exhibit, they have some preliminary plans done. They have not been reviewed by the city or submitted for review at this point, but they have plans for additional parking to be constructed here. This area is a slope, so there is a need for a small retaining wall to hold the slope up and ensure that they don't exceed standard slopes that are required by our code and ordinance. The addition would add about 20 parking stalls and a sidewalk. And this would be adjacent to the clubhouse parking lot and would provide additional sidewalk access on that side of the road to the clubhouse and pool. The HOA, just kind of wanted to do a benefit analysis of the city and the HOA to kind of compare them. So you can see they would get additional parking, and they would take away or take over some of the responsibility if the property were deeded to the HOA for enforcement, which we have not enforced it, from what I understand right now at this point, for any parking, because there have not been any complaints for the parking at that location. And this would also enable the HOA to maintain it and incorporate it into their landscaping and their neighborhood and help beautify or make the aesthetics of their area more pleasing. The city benefits, we'd obviously relieve the parking enforcement, the maintenance, and but the open space along the road would be reduced because we'd just be counting the open space inside of the HOA. After going through the request and looking through the ordinance, it's the staff's recommendation that the property have a deed prepared with a deed restriction by the HOA submitted to the city attorney for review and then be executed so that the HOA would be able to use the property. The side note that's not included here is there is an ordinance by the city in Code 1-10-14 that requires for the disposal of surplus property that's determined surplus by the city that we'd have to set a minimum bid. And so some preliminary calculations I did not go out and get an appraisal, but I looked at some old appraisals that were done for similar pieces of property. And we'd be anticipating about $7 per square foot raw cost on this land. It's about 25,500 square feet. That would come out to about $178,000. But there would be a reduction because, or an adjustment is what the appraisals would call it, because of the configuration, the use, the zoning, a handful of things. So I looked at the previous appraisals that were done and how they'd reduced, and there were reductions anywhere from 5% to 50% of the property value. So you could be looking at anywhere from $89,000 to $151,000. And the HOA would be putting approximately, I think, $75,000 to $100,000 in improvements on this property. Their construction costs are around $75,000, but they've also done engineering design. They will have to bond for this work, and they'll have to do some permits and things. So their cost would come out closer to $100,000, I believe. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions, and the applicant is here if there are questions for them as well.
Thank you, Blake. Any questions, any comments?
No, just for referring back to our last conversation on this topic, I appreciate you digging into that information. That was a question. The value of the improvements commensurate with the value of the land so that there's a more equitable swap happening there. So I'm appreciative of that. I've also considered whether or not, highest and best use of a property. I drove out there to look at it. It seems the highest best use would be a parking lot. I just can't see anything else for it. And I'd like to be able to prevent it from honestly being developed any other way. It just seems this is a great solution for us and for the residents there in the townhomes. And I support the recommendation that you guys made. So thank you.
My question might be to the applicant. Living in an HOA myself, CC&Rs and rules and regs with parking and enforcement, I'm assuming you already have public space because you have the community center there. And we're not forcefully doing it currently right now, so would it be an advantage to the city for having that especially with inoperable vehicles or unlicensed vehicles and et cetera, that mostly sit in those rules and regs. But again, like Steve, it's being used as a parking lot today. Why, I mean, it seems pretty easy decision there.
Yeah, I have a question about the suggestion for the revisionary clause that the property revert back to Harriman City ownership if used for anything other than a parking lot. What if at some point we decide that we really need that for a Charles parking lot or something like that, something unforeseen in the future that we're like, why did we give away this property? I should say give away, but allow it to be exchanged in this manner. Is there a way to include that? Would that be?
If that were your
idea.
primary policy decision, I would recommend that you not do a deed and rather grant a revocable permit to the applicant instead. We would maintain the ownership and have an opportunity then to call it back if there were ever a concern to do something else with it.
Something like a 99-year lease for $1 sort of deal.
Something
right?
like that. I think given the size of this and the intended use, a revocable permit like that would likely be the best option. If, again, that were your primary public policy
There's
concern.
going to be a trailhead just
Right.
right near there.
I don't think it's on the master plan. I mean, right, there's nothing there on the master plan. I drove by there. There's not gonna, I drove by like Steve, I challenged.
I did too.
We went and drove by there. I don't think we want it. I personally don't want it. If there's an expense to the city right now, just to say we're saving some open space, I don't get it.
Plus trail access from that point's pretty tricky.
Yeah,
Right.
you wouldn't get up there.
In previous discussions, if that were to become public parking, they would have to cross the private right-of-way to park in the public parking lot, which is a little different from what we normally do, so.
But it's allowed.
It would be allowed, but it opens up a lot of discussion about
Sure.
maintenance and cost sharing of maintenance of that piece of road, so, yeah,
Liability
it's
sharing.
complicated.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm just curious. And I guess, are we comfortable with the exchange in the 100,000? Are we comfortable with because my concern obviously was about opening up Pandora's box to every place that has something different like this. If they say, we'll come and improve it all for this amount of money, are we comfortable without doing a formal appraisal, which
So
costs
our
everybody
code-
time and money?
Yeah, our code does address that, and Blake touched on it already. I'll just read directly from the code on our surplus property section. It says, unless the city council has determined that consideration for the surplus property shall be based on other public policy factors. So another way of saying that is, you are required to do an appraisal unless you identify other public policy factors. So if you, on the record, state, as Blake has identified, that these other public policy considerations are sufficient for us not doing an appraisal and disposing of it for whatever value or no value at all, you can make that decision under our current ordinance.
So will you reiterate what those public policies are that you feel like make the exception? Just so they're on the record.
So what I looked at was the appraisal, or other appraisals. I'm not an appraiser, so the council may desire to have the applicant actually submit an appraisal of the property, or have us do one. But when I looked at it, it was, the raw value of the land would be approximately $178,000. With the typical reductions that are given for things such as access, zoning, topography, among other things, it would likely be around $90,000. That would be a 50% reduction.
Just pretty much what they're going to end up spending.
And their expenditures are very equal to that.
And the other public policy factors you've already all touched on, the liability, the cost of maintenance and improvement to the city as well. Those are additional factors that you can consider in disposing of this property.
And I assume that if people are parking there illegally and we're not enforcing it, we knowingly know that they're parking there, we're not enforcing it. If there's ever a problem with that, then it
Correct.
becomes, we're liable for things like that too. Am I assuming that correctly?
Yes.
Well, you have damage on the curb and the infrastructure that's there with the water main, and then the potential of easement access and right-of-ways, so, for utilities. So.
Sure.
Like, just look at benefit to the community. There, right now, there's nothing there. I mean, it's just,
Right.
it's not being kept. They're parking there. It's not, they don't park in a spot. They're just random. I mean, I drove out there. You think there could be 2 car legs, but I mean, it's pretty random. I think it'll clean up. To me, it's a beautification for the city. It's a
Yeah.
addition to the city, and we get it off our books.
You're talking 22 stalls potential, this outline. How many vehicles are currently parked there, roughly?
About the same amount. We're
seeing about 20 vehicles parked there pretty consistently. It will significantly improve parking ratios for the association. Currently, so
You want to step up to the
Yeah,
mic?
can you step up? Sorry.
yeah, so one of the biggest concerns, right, in this situation, so from an HOA management perspective and in parking enforcement, is just that a better parking ratio gives us reasonable means to direct people where to park, right? Currently, we have 54 kind of extra spaces, right, that according to the governing documents and the current parking policy within this association are intended for guest use, right? And then owners are required to park in their less than 20-foot driveways, right? Which if you have anything larger than a sedan presents a problem, right? Which is why we're seeing a lot of kind of the more oversized vehicles parking in these spaces. But yeah, there's 22 additional parking spaces, and the board, kind of once we get this approved and in there, the board plans to rework the parking policy that's in place to allow residents to park in some of the existing guest parking spaces that we've noticed, are going somewhat unused, right? And then we're able to lease that, generate some extra revenue for the association to recover some of the cost of building this in the first place. So, but I mean, it increases almost 50% of the parking ratio that we have in this association. So it's just significant improvement in these high-density developments.
Trailers, campers, RVs, all non-authorized?
Yeah, all non-authorized, and the board doesn't have any intentions of changing that, so.
And you have other, I'm assuming CCNRs or other HOA codes that would prohibit, as you mentioned, unmaintained
Yeah, so
continuously
currently,
parked,
I mean.
not running, not
Yeah, so
registered
I can tell you what it does, right? So the current parking policy requires that if the vehicle is parked in a common area parking space, which would be absorbed into this, that the vehicle has to be in working condition, has to be currently registered with the state, and likewise, recreational vehicles and things like that are still not permitted. So, and you have two of the other board members here, and like I said, in all discussions in the amendments they intend to make to their parking policy are more going to be for the ratios as to how much is for guest and how much is for resident, but not changing some of the other, there's no intention for any changes to the recreational vehicle permits or anything like that, right?
And that's all in the rules and regs, so you don't have to go to the CCNRs for that, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't have to do a CCNR amendment for that.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, some of this is cleanup from, like you just mentioned, 20-foot driveways, things like that, that were approved a long time ago that really were not sufficient for this type of development, so, yeah. And I assume that this will have to be built to city standards, not HOA standards, correct?
Yeah, so this plan set would have to be submitted to engineering for review and approved, and then it would be inspected by the city, and the bond would be required, and then there would be no warranty bond. So once the work, just a surety bond, so that we would ensure that the work would get finished, not started, not complete.
Just quick follow-up, Blake, you said that a sidewalk will be installed. This isn't just going to be blacktop, it's going to be to our standards, curb gutter, sidewalk, setbacks, retaining wall, all of that is going to be required.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll meet the Rose Crest standards. So that'd be 5-foot sidewalk, which is our current standard as well. So, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm worried about, right, is we think our standards, and then we've seen so many of these come back and, well, they just threw some blacktop down because that's what that MDA said they could do. But I just want to reiterate kind of a couple of things that Sherry said with a few of our overarching concerns, right? So sometimes with these things, it's easy to just look at it in a vacuum. Say, oh yeah, this one makes total sense, but then it does set a precedent for other things. And so some of these things that might seem silly to those that are saying, look, this is easy, just do it. We have to think about how it applies to other areas. In this case, I think it is pretty unique. I mean, I did the same thing. I went and visited it, drove around, looked at the plan. Is it incorporated into our parks plan? Do we have plans for anything there? If we wanted to, would it make sense to put anything there?
Yeah.
Are we taking something away from the general community? No. Parking is an issue in all of these HOAs, right? No matter what style of homes they are, parking's a huge issue. There's the liability, the maintenance, all of those public policy issues. I think it fits, and the value I think fits. I think the reasoning is sound, and we're not just giving it away. That was one of the things for me from the last meeting. I'm like, no, I don't want to just give property away, right? We can't do that because that does set a danger precedent. And I think Teddy and I met yesterday and talked about a few general things, and one of the things that I get asked all the time is, the city has this piece of property behind my house, I want to buy it, right? Well, and that, if we start doing that, then how do you say no to people? You let them, how can you tell me no when it becomes an issue? I think we asked for legal to really look into it. I think we steer clear of all of those things, and
Yeah.
this does make sense. So it's taken longer than these folks have wanted, but we've vetted everything out, and I think we're solid.
I agree.
One clarification, Blake, on Skies Lane, that says public street, but it's a private street, correct?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
private.
All right. And then drainage, sewer, water, all that?
Yeah, so this subdivision, the streets are actually easements for public utilities and access. So yeah, the utilities run in the street and they're public, but the street itself is privately owned and maintained.
And then stormwater, that will be factored into that as well? 'Cause-
Engineering will take a look at that and make sure that the detention basin is sized properly. And as small as this is, I don't anticipate any need to, enlarge that. There's enough buffer in the calculations to allow that, but they'll check that.
Could you step up? Sorry. Yep.
Just to clarify, yeah, that was considered in the engineering that we had come out. We had Ensign Engineering come out and do all of the engineering for us, right? And they assessed that the right term I'm looking for here, the impenetrable surfaces, right, is not significant enough to impact the existing storm drain system. So.
Thank you. I think we're all headed there.
Sorry, I'm having a little sidebar.
You can raise that question with
This-
the rest of the council.
This is the question I was just asking the attorney is, look, like, we like what we're seeing, and in other situations like this, we put something in the wording that says, we want to get what you're showing us, right? Not just, we'll give you the property and trust that all this stuff will get done, because, right?
point.
Just the belt and suspenders sort of deal. And give them your.
So it's a legitimate question, and I think the best answer that I can give you, that likely goes against the interest of the applicant, is that we do that by agreement, that we say, we agree to deed this property to you so long as you build the parking lot described or submit according to the plan submitted to the city by this date, and have as an attachment to that agreement the deed with the reversionary clause. We don't have that agreement prepared tonight, right? So we would have to kick this to another meeting and bring that on the 26th with that agreement, if that were a condition that you wanted to have as part of this transaction.
I don't want to delay it unnecessarily, but
Well, it kind of doesn't delay in as much as, if we feel like we're on the same page, we just need to get the agreement in place. It's a technicality to move it to 2 weeks from now. They can still move forward on engineering, design guidelines, those types of things. It doesn't necessarily stop their progress. Just knowing that we are intending on moving forward, we just want to make sure that there's an agreement in place that requires them to actually perform on this.
And to your point, I think it actually might be good to submit the application, and then we could say, as submitted, right?
True.
That could be really helpful to make the agreement more solid. So I appreciate the question, and I think that's a great tack.
I do too.
The engineering standards do provide some protection there because they'll require pavement and standard sidewalks, and you can't exceed a 3-to-1 slope, and retaining walls need to be engineered and designed properly. So you do have some protection in your engineering standards and city code as well.
Yeah, but this is just guarantee that they're actually going to do the work
Because there's
with the
nothing.
property.
by a certain date.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says, if we just put a reversionary clause that says, I'll revert back to Harriman, there's nothing in this that says, we're allowing you to do this, so you'll do that. There's no agreement that binds them to that.
So if there's,
Is that direction then, to me, to prepare an agreement?
if we're open, we could just continue this item then?
Yeah, for the next meeting. I will make a motion to continue to the next city council meeting and direct staff to prepare the agreement in correlation with the HOA so that we can make sure that when we're deeding this property, there's an agreement in place that says, we're going to deed it to you, but you have to perform on the agreement.
By a reasonable date, let me
By-
give us
by-
a suggestion.
yeah.
And I'll work on that date with the applicant.
Yeah.
I second that motion.
Okay, motion by Sherry, second by.
City
oh,
manager
hold
has
on.
it.
I just had a question. I know they've been waiting patient, and maybe it's a separate motion that you just put on record that is your intent to do.
I was going to ask if we could do that, so they could move ahead.
They want to start moving forward, and
Well, that's what I was just
if I
gonna
were there, I
say,
would be a
and
little bit
yeah, my
nervous.
comments for the vote is, I think you've got unanimous support for it, just a technicality for the paperwork.
There's something we can do on the, Jackie, is there something we can do on the record? Or is that tricky?
Pending the agreement, or?
We could do a motion approving that and directing the city attorney to actually come to have the agreement stating that this is conditioned upon an agreement that they will do these improvements.
Because we used to do that at planning commission all the time.
Jackie's right. You don't have to have the agreement come back to you. You can authorize us to execute an agreement within certain boundaries.
I like that a lot.
You establish the bumpers, and we
I just
create
feel
the
like
agreement.
there needs to be that security that there's performance. Not that they
Technically, we have
wouldn't
a
because they
vote in a
want to do
second,
it,
so
but.
we need to-
I was going to say, so we've got to vote in a second.
So yeah, you've already got
So-
the motion on the table.
So do I withdraw?
Sure,
My
or
motion?
do we
But do we have to
am-
vote?
Or do we do
You
an
can make a
amend-
motion to
amend-
strike
You
your,
could amend your.
Or would you like to
Or
amend
amend your
it?
motion.
I can amend my motion. So I can amend my motion to approve the surplus of Harriman City property located at 4345 West Skies Lane and directing the city attorney to finalize a deed with a reversionary clause that the property revert back to Harriman City ownership if used for anything other than a parking lot, and additionally create an agreement that will stipulate the HOA must perform on the parking lot by a specific date. Is that right?
that's specific enough. Yes, for me, yes.
You comfortable with that?
And I
Jackie, you
understand the
comfortable?
intent of the motion as
or
well.
conditional on that
Yeah.
agreement being executed?
Does the council have a particular date that they would like to have the application either submitted by or the improvements completed by would make the agreement execution easier?
I think 2 years is good enough, but I think having 6 months on the application,
Yeah, 6 months on the application, I
Yeah.
agree.
because it seems like they're ready to move.
6 months, 24 months, yeah. I think
I think 6 months on the application. If you guys have been beaten at the door, so if you want to get this done, have your application in within 6 months. I think that's fair. Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay. Motion by Sherry,
I will second that motion again.
second by Steve. I'll do a roll call vote. Steve,
Yes.
Sherry,
Yes.
Teddy,
Yes.
Jared,
Yes.
and I will vote yes as well. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you for your patience. We've gone through this process.
Make it pretty.
Okay, we'll move on to item 10.2, discussion and consideration of a request from Boulder Development to approve a Herriman City official zoning map amendment for 2.7 acres from A25 agricultural zone to C2 commercial zone, and 7.1 acres from A5 agricultural to A25 agricultural zones to R110 residential zone located approximately 5652 west, 131st south. Mr. Malloy.
Thank you. As the council recalls, this was discussed during our December meeting, during the work meeting. This was brought to you as a legislative recommendation for approval from the Planning Commission following a public hearing. So the subject property is just within that circle on this vicinity map. A little closer look at that property. This is the current zoning of the property. You can see it both A.25 and A.5. The applicants did include as an exhibit a potential subdivision plan. This has not been reviewed by city staff for compliance with city standards or by engineering department or the planning commission, but just a potential concept for the property. There are some property exchanges that are part of this proposal privately. There's been some interest in potentially talking with the city about vacating some right-of-way. Engineering would review all of that as part of a subdivision application with the city. So this is the current general plan, which guides our rezone applications. You can see to the west, the western half of this property is low-density residential. The general plan does have a specific density range of 1.8 to 2.5 dwelling units per acre. And then you can see the commercial property along the east. So again, their rezone application is consistent with the general plan. So the C2 zone is consistent with where the commercial zoning is in the general plan, and the R110 is consistent with the general plan as well. There was a recommendation from the Planning Commission to add a zoning condition reflecting the general plan density range of a maximum of 2.5. The staff has analyzed this request and said that it does comply with the standards for a review of considering a zoning map amendment. So again, that is a recommendation from the Planning Commission. We've reached out to the applicant, and we were told he would be here tonight. I'm assuming we've primarily been talking with Alex Winder, and he was not able to be here, but I was told somebody from the applicant would be here tonight.
And they're here. Yep. Thank you, Michael. Any questions for Michael? Do we go to the applicant? I'm used to Planning Commission. We go to the applicant.
Only if we need, I think, only if we have questions for him.
Okay. Any questions for Michael? Any comments?
I'm just so excited that we get an application to change residential to commercial. Like, that happens so rarely. I'm just almost giddy.
My question would be more for what the Planning Commission discussion was. I mean, in that map, if you can maybe go back to that.
Sure. This one?
Right. So towards the north area, the larger lots that are adjacent to the other larger lots, is that when if we approve it as is with that zoning condition, do those have to be that way as a buffer, or do we have to specifically call that out?
No. It would just be an overall density for the R110.
Because I mean, this layout makes sense, and when we look at this, I'm like, yeah, why not? Like,
Yeah,
I just kind of whispered to Teddy, I'm like, so with what Michael just said, unless we make them stick to something like this, that's not what it's gonna look like, right? And those homeowners there that maybe saw this layout are thinking that's what they're gonna get, and they potentially won't. So that's my only reservation.
One of the things we discussed with the Planning Commission when we presented this was that this lot layout currently shouldn't be any of your consideration when discussing the rezone. That's a separate matter, right? And so my legal advice to you is that even though you're viewing this right now, really you should take those lot lines off of there, and your consideration for approving or denying this rezone request should be based solely on whether that zone is the best use for that land.
Right. I agree.
And then planning
will have their say at it.
and they could go through that part. Okay.
Yep.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
sure.
and that's the only
Because
thing.
I just know if this has been shown to those neighbors, they're thinking they're good, right?
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because that's not anything to do with that. All we're doing tonight is just changing the zone, and the zone has parameters that allow certain density
Yeah.
depending on how
So
they
maybe,
situate
yeah,
it.
so maybe just maybe going forward, if that's the case, then these lines shouldn't be on there, and that shouldn't be what's sent to the adjacent property owners.
Sure. And I didn't mean to take the wind out of your sails, because you do still have the ability, as Michael mentioned, to apply zoning conditions
Sure.
that might address some of those lot layouts that you're seeing, so.
But it's hard to apply zoning conditions at that point too, because it's not been to the planning commission. We don't have any idea if what it meets, you know what I mean, how it really fits or lays out.
But honestly, even if it's laid out a little bit differently, the reality is that's what our general plan is. It makes sense with the surrounding neighborhood. It as long as we have that, density cap on it, they're going to build residential houses. They can only build so many.
Up to 2.5.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of self-regulates itself. If they want to maximize
I agree with
the
that.
thing, they're going to follow that.
And they will.
Other than if this is what's been circulated, then that's what those property owners think that they're getting, and so they're not here to comment, et cetera, right?
And I think you've made a really important point that when things are presented to neighbors as inducement to support a zoning change, they should not include things that haven't been submitted or approved by
Yes.
the city.
And I think even for the planning commission, right, when this went to them, same thing, if they're shown that and they're thinking the same thing and they don't think to add that in there because that's what's shown on the slide, right? Then we all get something different than what we thought we were getting.
I would say there's probably a better map. It's on page 336 of your packet. that,
It was-
I think
it's
in the
in this,
future, that's
too.
what we would
Yeah.
use. Well, it's a different map than what's in the presentation. I
But
just looked at the
my
two.
overall point is that if this isn't what's actually been submitted, why are we looking at it as part of our decision-making?
That's a good point, and we've given this other map, we should have used this map, and we'll make sure that we're doing that in the future.
And for what's, sent out to the adjacent property owners, same thing, right?
Council, if I may, as you can appreciate, a lot of times when our residents hear these rezone requests or general plan amendments, they always want to know, well, what's it for? What are you thinking of doing with this property? Now, oftentimes when we receive a rezone request for future development, a lot of times we will also have a subdivision application that is paired with the rezone. And at least the planning commission may have seen a preliminary plan. This one did not. We have not received a subdivision application at all. So again, that's why that image has not been reviewed or matured at all to comply with city standards. But we'll work with
It's just
administration.
a comment for
Yeah.
me, like going forward, just in our
Right,
processes, right?
right.
Mayor, may I add just one comment on
Yes,
this?
please.
So with the site plan application, keep in mind that they will have to have a neighborhood meeting with that as well as they come back through. So
Well, and
they'll get to see the
for
plan again.
this, for this particular project, again, I don't want to muddy the water for this one necessarily. With the zoning condition of the 2.5, you average it out, yeah, you're probably going to get close to that. But again, if it hasn't been, if that preliminary plat hasn't been submitted as part of the application, like that's not what we should be showing the adjacent property owners, right? Because it was not, we're giving them the idea that that's what it's going to be.
Michael Preston has something, he was at the community meeting, are we okay? I'd like to, are we okay with that, Jackie? Can I? Yes, yes. I'm not used to having this. Preston's one of our community, he holds these meetings.
I was the one that ran the community meeting, so just to clarify, maybe some of those residential ideas, at least for the residents that were in attendance at the meeting, I believe Alex was his name. He did a pretty good job of explaining that that was just an idea map of where it would probably lay out, but that it wasn't finalized by any means and there hadn't been anything submitted on it. So for those that were in the meeting, they
good
were.
for those that are there.
Yeah, they were informed, but yes, that's
Same thing,
not
it's just-
speaking for everyone who wasn't there.
I want to make the larger point procedurally going forward, as our attorney just said, we shouldn't be considering that in our decision-making, right? Because that's not what's being applied for.
So it shouldn't be in the
So it
packet.
shouldn't be part of it.
Yeah. Duly noted. Okay.
One comment, the road connectability, is that the potential plan or sight line of those roads and engineering and whatnot? Or is that still
I think
a idea?
that's also subdivision, so, yep.
Okay, all right.
All we're looking at right now is that zone. Are we okay with that 110 there and the C2 there? That's all we can look at.
Can we get more C2?
Yeah, but we do intend to have road connectivity into 129th, correct?
Yes, there,
For fire, for everything?
we were looking at, we've discussed before the Old Town street cross-sections are very large. So we're anticipating to address some of those issues as we come through with Old Town and making sure there's connectivity to, I think it's 130th and 129th. 130th to the west, 129th to the north, and then Main Street to the south. So yes, there's a lot of discussion that engineering has had on that already. And so we're eagerly anticipating a site plan application to start working on that with the applicant.
And that road, I mean, the potential road is right up against that Questar pump station, that gas station there?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, I'll say for me, this is a much needed, coming from the planning commission, this is a much needed inventory in our city is this size of lots, so.
I like the sheep.
The sheep?
I like the
The
old barn. I want the old barnwood.
Okay, any other concerns? Look for a motion, maybe?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2022-02, amending the Harriman City zoning map for property located at 5652 West, 13100 South, rezoning 2.7 acres from A25 agricultural to C2 commercial, and 7.1 acres of A25 and 8.50 agricultural to R110 residential.
With the zoning condition
Which zoning condition?
that the planning commission recommended?
Max of 2.5,
Oh, yeah, with a max of 2.5.
the zoning condition.
with a zoning condition of a maximum of 2.5 units per acre.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Sherry, second by Jared. Go to a roll call vote. Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
And Steve?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. That motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Move on to item 10.3, consideration to award construction contract for the Juniper Canyon Recreation Area Phase 1. Jonathan.
Good evening, council. Yeah, so we're here again to chat just a little bit about the Juniper Canyon Recreation Area and on for decision. The construction contract is the question. Should we execute this and move forward or not? So Juniper Canyon is, it's a little misrepresented in the vicinity map, is largely on the uphill side of Mountain View Corridor, but there is a portion, and Phase 1 is on the downhill side of Mountain View Corridor. Excuse me. Yeah, Mountain View Corridor and off of Sentinel Ridge Drive. And so again, the entire red area represents the area for the Juniper Canyon Recreation project. So this phase is largely that black rectangle that goes around that east side of the project. And that is largely a trailhead parking lot with additional amenities, specifically a bike ramp. In fact, I'll just jump right to the next one here in just a second. But in addition to that, there's the additional asphalt path as a bid alternate. And it's that black squiggly line kind of in the middle. You can kind of see the concept right there. You got the parking lot, and again, the amenities of a bike ramp, I think we call it. No, excuse me, I'm trying to remember. Pump track, thank you. Which was purchased already prior to this project, and we relocated it to this area, at least in a planned point of view. So, and then as well as there's additional bike amenities around it. So we solicited some SOQs from contractors. We took a little bit of an interesting approach. It's relatively new for our engineering department to do this, but we actually pre-qualified a handful of contractors prior to bidding the contract to the contractors. So we asked for their statement of qualifications, and 3 contractors were selected. 6 proposed, 3 were selected. And then the bid documents were sent to those 3. So the bid results came in as shown, and I'll get into a lot of numbers here, but the main number that is important is BH Incorporated, or BHI. They are the lowest, most responsible bidder on the project. So the base bid plus the bid alternate for the trail is approximately $2.3 million for the construction contract. And as stated, and we get into this just a little bit, it's park impact fee eligible project. And so I decided I'd get just into a little bit of the numbers, if that's okay. So before we get in there, the total estimated funds to collect, and this is the city at large, right? So we anticipate a range from $20 million to $29 million. This is in discussion with Alan, just kind of making sure we were on par. So that's kind of that order of magnitude that we expect to receive in park impact fees. And then our obligations, this is around $3 million that we currently have with current reimbursement agreements, as well as MDAs that are executed. And then in the master plan, there's about $175 to $200 million worth of projects in the IFFP.
That's a lot of grant paperwork to fill out.
That's right.
My 40 acres of soccer field.
That's a lot of construction
Someone else
projects.
sounds really good right now, doesn't it?
And this project is no exception to that, right? In fact, it's probably the poster child example, and we'll go through that as well. So I thought this would be good to kind of soak in these points a little bit before we proceed. Any questions before I move on? All right, so this slide here is kind of to summarize all the project expenses for this particular phase, and they sum up to about $3.3 million. So that includes the trail, it includes the trailhead, it also includes some items that the city is either already acquired or planning to provide, And then there's obviously an owner's contingency, and then some fees, as well as some additional inspections and Rocky Mountain power fees. Now, all this is outlined, and we're calling, it's an Exhibit B of the staff report, but we're starting to have these budget forms created, and it's more detailed and provided in the staff report, and it goes into a little more detail. So our revenue and grants, you can see here we have the TRCC grant, as well as the Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant. And then you have payment from Rosecrest Communities, who paid a lump sum to the city for this project. And that sums up to about $1.9 million. And I want to be clear about this slide as well. The actual expenses that you'll see are the 3.3 that I pointed out, but this would be, after all is said and done, this would be the net takeaway from the park impact fee fund bucket once those grants have kind of gone through and we've been reimbursed. So then as far as budget codes, this is kind of just a summary of what is currently adopted and what we anticipate in future years, fiscal years, both including 22 as well as 23, just the one, because we anticipate an additional $500,000 to come in from the same grant. So that sums up to be about 4.3 million on what's budgeted, as well as what we have in revenue from grants. And again, just before we jump in, so there's some key project values to understand. You've got your construction contract, which we're here to talk about today. The total project expenses are 3.4, and the total project budget is 4.6. So the options for the council today, I'm moving forward with the construction contract for both the trailhead and the asphalt trail, which is the bid alternate, or just the asphalt trail, just the base bid, which is the trailhead, and then option 3 being reject those bids.
Davey, I have a question. What, with the disparity between the estimated cost at 3.6 or whatever it was and the 4.3, what do we do with those excess funds? How are those used? What are the plans for those?
This is phase 1. My guess is they're going to go to either phase 2 or something similar to that.
Yeah.
Is that, are those funds just part of the general park impact fee bucket, and so they're going to be used for future
Correct.
things, not for
Correct.
anything else?
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure it's not.
Yep. Good question.
Become a slush for some other kind of projects.
Yep.
Police might take it.
And a quick point of clarification to your point, Councilmember Shields, is the engineer's estimate was around 2.2 million, and this came in on the low bid is around 2.3. So we're seeing actually coming in a little closer on this particular project. So.
A lot better than last trailhead.
And that TRCC funds, it comes in at 50/50, so we're only receiving half of it at the beginning and then half at completion? Or what's the timeline on
It's
it?
$550,000 per year for the next 2 years.
Okay.
Great.
So this fiscal year, this half will receive the 550, and then next year we'll receive an additional.
And is that reimbursement, so it decreases our 4.3?
It reduces our 3.3 expenditure.
Our 3.3?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Good question.
So it covers basically all our city expenses rather than the construction cost, give or take?
Yeah, so the net takeaway from our park impact fee after we pay we get money back from those grants is around 1.8 million total.
Great.
If that makes sense.
This is really a kickstart to this whole project. It's definitely going to be phased out over time. We haven't talked about it for a while, but I anticipate our Frisbee golf community coming in and doing a lot of volunteer work and helping us get that going as part of this project, as well as our trails committees. They're always welcome and eager to help us do trail work and get some of that stuff installed. So,
if I remember right, there's stuff farther up the canyon, right, where there's going to be some more amenities, right? Okay.
correct.
Yeah.
We've also met with some local mountain bike groups and trail groups, and they're eager to assist in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah. Perfect. Any other questions from the council?
What is your recommendation right there?
Yeah, we would recommend awarding the contract for both the base bid and the bid alternate for around that 2.3.
My guess is if we just do the base bid and we go back for the alternate's going to be more.
It's going to be double, yeah.
Every year, every week, the prices just keep going up.
We're not out of the bid, they still have an open bid, it's still a valid bid?
It is,
We haven't
yes.
missed the bid date or anything?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Nice.
Good question.
I'll look for a motion then.
If you'll allow me, this is in my district. I'm really excited about this. I
Please
think the
do.
Residents are really excited about this, so. Motion to approve the execution of the Juniper Canyon Recreation Area Phase 1 contract and award it to the lowest responsible bidder, BH Inc.
Thank you.
Motion by Steve,
Second.
second by Sherry. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Is that good? Jackie, on that one? Perfect. Okay. Excited to see it happen. Okay, move on to item 10.4, discussion and consideration of working groups to discuss pending and proposed master development agreements. Chase.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a little background here. In September of 2021, the City Council approved an MDA policy wherein they established a procedure that could be considered as MDAs are discussed amongst staff level, where working groups would be created. And on those working groups, 2 members of council would sit to help in those discussions and bring council policies to those discussions that would then be brought back in a finalized development agreement for the entire council to discuss and consider. We have received requests to enter into 3 separate development agreements. Those are Laguna, the second one is Malibu, and the third would be the Automall. Laguna and Malibu are very close in proximity, located up on the foothills on the south end of the city boundaries. The Automall is just west of Mountain View Corridor and north of 126th. The working groups is presented in the staff report. I guess I'll back up. It's recommended that with these working groups, we combine the Laguna and Malibu working groups because those properties are so close in proximity. And
Same developer, right?
to my understanding, yes. I think ownership may be different, same developer, however. So I think there's some overlap there that it would just be efficient to combine those working groups for those 2 developments. We're proposing for those 2 developments 3 separate working groups, a planning working group, an infrastructure working group, and a finance working group. The function of the planning group would be to discuss the zoning, the types of uses in the development, the design guidelines, and any other criteria kind of associated with that. The function of the infrastructure working group would really be to identify and address the impacts of the development on the infrastructure needs in the city, not only the existing infrastructure, but the infrastructure needed and required by the development. The finance working group would be responsible for identifying the cost to the city and the benefit to the city of those potential developments, and looking at how those infrastructure impacts and the planning impacts would contribute to that. So as you'll notice in the staff report, we've suggested a few council members to sit on those with additional staff and the developers team. These are totally at your discretion. Who sits on those? We've made some recommendations, we being myself and Blake, the Community Development Director. For the planning working group, we've recommended Mayor Palmer and Councilmember Shields. The reason we identified Councilmember Shields is this is his district, and we thought those design elements might be something that he would be more interested in than, say, the infrastructure or finance aspects. Not that those are boring, but they're more visible and generally more discussed, yeah. For the infrastructure group, we've recommended Councilmember Orrin and Councilmember Hodges, and then for the finance working group, Mayor Palmer and Councilmember Henderson. Again, these are totally at your discretion who sits on those, and under your policy, it's totally at your discretion whether or not you even want these working groups. It could be done entirely by staff. However, this is just a procedure within your policy that we're now bringing to you for your consideration. The Automall working group, we've simplified that to just 2 working groups because it's such a smaller area. We've looked at just doing the planning and infrastructure groups combined with Mayor Palmer and Councilmember Henderson on those. And then a finance working group with Mayor Palmer and Councilmember Shields on those. Again, totally your discretion who sits on those, who has the most time available to meet during the week to sit on those. But those are our recommendations at this time, and we're now turning that over to you for your discussion and questions if you have any.
Thank you, Chase.
I would say, first of all, thanks for bringing them to us this way. This is much more systematic than last time, so thanks for refining this and getting impact.
We're getting better.
Yeah. No, it was hard.
Yeah.
It's hard when you first start
Right.
to get it. But thank you for that. This is helpful.
And if I could, just add to that point, I think as we looked at this as staff, we obviously went through this process with Olympia, and we looked at that and said, okay, what are things that we can improve on? And I think we're getting better as a city and staff of reviewing these types of requests.
Good job. Thank you. I have no problem serving anything that I've been assigned to.
I think those are good suggestions for all of them.
I would agree. The only thing I would say is if there is anyone interested in the finance work group for Automall, I'm happy to be in that. We did it with, I served in that with the Olympia discussion in that capacity as well. So I'm happy to do that, but if somebody else feels really inspired, I'm happy to step out either, so.
Feel inspired, Teddy. Isn't that what remember Jerry kept doing that? You Steve will do that.
Yeah, I volunteer Steve.
I nominate.
I nominate Steve.
The new guys don't know any better yet. Just put 'em on.
We'll get them.
Yeah, thanks, I can tell.
Just wait till there's really important vote. Everybody else will go first. And then leave it to you guys to figure it out.
Does anybody have any reservations, concerns about this? Any issues?
No, I like this plan.
I think it's a great try. I mean, we head down that road, and I'm sure we can make changes if we needed down the
Yeah.
road, but I think this
Yeah.
is, it's a great start. I think
I think it's sound reasoning. I mean, Nathan had called me out specifically, let me know kind of about this, and the thinking of staff is that, whoever's district it is should be on that, planning group. That's what's most visible to the residents and probably has the most elements that they're immediately concerned about. So I think that the reasoning through it all makes a lot of sense. So if you guys are ready, I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Well organized.
Yep.
All right, motion to approve the creation of the council-involved working groups to discuss details for a potential master development agreement for the Laguna, Malibu, and Automall developments.
Second?
motion by Jared, second by Teddy. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Vote carries. Thank you, Chase. I was looking forward to that. Move on to item 10.5, consideration to allow encroachment onto Herriman City property. Jonathan again.
All right, we received a pretty unique request for the Providence Hall Elementary School to encroach on Herriman City property. Just want to give a quick little background and run through that. So Providence Hall approached Herriman City. They have an expansion you kind of see in the red shaded area, and actually approached the city and said, hey, is it okay if we let some of the grading fill encroach onto Herriman City property? So this is actually kind of in that Juniper Canyon recreation area. Has incidental effect on that area. Again, it's the fill in the area, kind of red clouded here. But what I'll do, I'm gonna zoom on this just a little bit. Here's kind of zooming in on the expansion, and then the red shaded area is the actual grading that would kind of fall into that area. The toe of slope, which is where it exists today, to where they would be moving it is really only like 10 or 15 feet, but the actual encroachment area total that they'd be disturbing is quite a bit more significant, kind of as you're seeing there. I think the motivation behind this is I think there's a convenience and perhaps a fiscal benefit on their end. I think the alternative for them would be a retaining wall to ensure that they do not encroach within Herriman City property. In fact, they've submitted plans to the city for us to review and that have been approved, that have the retaining wall. And then this is just kind of a parallel effort saying, hey, is it possible we could do this? And if so, we would change that. Now, procedurally, we typically would require a developer to make sure that it's called daylighting, or having not allowing the encroachment onto another property. So of course, option one, we recommend that we follow that particular procedure. Then option two would be to allow that. Pretty straightforward request. Again, it's unique, I think, and this is, we don't typically have people asking that. It's usually just done. I'm not saying that always happens, but anyway, so they approached this. But
Jonathan, are options 1 and 2 mutually exclusive here? Is it either A or B?
Can
we can't make their encroachment
yeah.
revocable?
Yep. Yeah. So you would not need. So they would be. So if you went for option 1, you would not be doing option 2. If that's what you're asking.
Yes.
Yeah. So then option 2, that would essentially be say no, but the option could be that it would be yes, allowing it, but then a revocable permit, which essentially just means at any time the city could require the elementary school to pull back those encroachments, but then they would still be disturbing it again. But anyway, did that answer your question?
Yeah, to your point, I think there's a lot of encroachments that are done for private property owners looking to expand their own property for personal use.
Right.
And they don't come and ask for those permission, if you will.
Right.
The fact that this is building a track up there, which is really awesome. I like the idea of what it's enhancing the school, competitions, PE activities, all kinds of things up there. I think is a good use. It's pretty steep right there, if I'm reading that right.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a lot of real tangible use for it. So grading it differently isn't, I don't think, a major impedance to any public use of the property or anything like that. So generally, I'm in favor of it. I don't necessarily like the idea of having it a permanent encroachment per se, where it's just like you do it and it could never be reversed. That's one of the things we've talked about before. However, if we're going to allow it for the construction of something like that, I understand why we would just say, okay, go ahead, and just leave it, yeah.
So I'm curious, I guess, is it an encroachment or is it just a disturbance permit? Like they need to utilize that property while they're doing this and then they'll put it back the way it was, correct?
That's a good question. So they are requesting a permanent encroachment of grading onto Harriman City property.
They want to dump.
So they don't have to do their retention.
Correct,
right?
yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So if they had to grade it, they're required to slope at a maximum %, and they right now, just based on just sloping it, they wouldn't hit the property line before they would go into so they would otherwise need a retaining wall to make that work.
So what are they proposing for erosion control and things like that? What does it look like for them to do that? Is it
Because it is
an
part of our
enhancement to our
trail
personal-
master plan, et cetera. It's not like it's somewhere that's unseen by anyone.
The disturbance would be seen from the area, and what you would see is a disturbed area where right now it has native plant material. They, of course, would be required, and I think that's been outlined in the staff report, that we would require them to revegetate and establish it to ensure that it's an established slope side and it's not disturbed, if that was allowed.
So it's gonna kind of be put back to how it was, other than the grade is gonna change.
Native vegetation, yeah.
It seems like a good idea.
If you go back to that close-up slide.
Yeah.
It appears that the proposed slope matches the existing slope farther down the line there, where it's going to be very similar.
I would say this, and I didn't catch an actual slope on the native that they're going over, but there is a little bit more of a heightened slope that they could achieve. That the native slope was more flat than a 3-to-1. They're proposing to go straight to the standard maximum, which is a 3-to-1.
But even the farther down the line on that topo, what would that be, south of their property?
South, yeah.
It appears that they're not even going out as far as that slope is. They're 35, but we're farther into our property to 50, 35. So their slope is steeper, less encumbering encroachment on our land, but.
Right. again, it's moving the toe of slope. So right now it comes a steep slope and then flattens out,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it's more vertical there, so. But it just evens out that slope, so it looks more symmetrical, similar to the existing slopes on the south side, is what it kind of looks like.
If we allow it, Wendy, is that going to affect Juniper? If we allow that, is that going to affect anything with the rec area?
No, and that's a good question. We took the design team out with the elementary school and visited the area just to kind of make sure that that wasn't going to impede or adversely affect the project. So that's a good question.
So you have option one is staff's recommendation. Why is that your recommendation?
Right. From a procedural standpoint, following the standards, we would typically recommend if this was a review when it comes in, we would say you're required to grade to the property line. And so that would be what we would typically do from our department. Now, of course, as a council decision, if they want to award and go and deviate from that, that could be your decision.
So again, it's the setting of precedence is a concern, right? Because to me, it's like it makes sense. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but
It's a school, great, you can do it, but then somebody else comes
yeah,
in and we say no.
exactly. So do we set a precedence by allowing them to do this? And that's the question.
But, you know, I would just say this. I think this idea of we're setting a precedent probably gets taken a little too far. Because in this instance, there's a very specific set of criteria that we're considering under which we're making a decision. And I think it only sets a precedent for something that has the exact same criteria. Is it a school? Is it on a hill? Is it this many feet? Is it in an area where it's not going to be developed, where it doesn't impede anything else, where it doesn't improve access? You know, if it meets all 9 or 10 of the things that we're considering, then yes, I could say that it makes a precedent. But I don't think this is a precedent that applies to any other encroachment that isn't very, very similar to this, right? So although I understand the concern, I think somebody would be making a big stretch to relate this encroachment decision to somebody on their personal property who went past their property line and built a fence 10 feet past, you know?
Well, I just think
I'm
about,
thinking about any other similar structure, right? So if it's an office building, right? They don't want to do a retaining wall, so they want to do the same thing and just dump it down the canyon. And that's putting it harshly, I know, but we kind of have to go in that. I know Chase is wanting to say something to that.
So Councilmember Shields took the words out of my mouth. Precedents, I'm not overly concerned about precedents from a legal perspective if they're supported by policy decisions, right? If you are articulating the reasons why you're doing something that, to Jonathan's point, deviates from a typical course of action, and you're supporting that decision and that deviation based upon sound policy decisions. This is a school, this benefits children, the encroachment is on a recreation area that won't be impacted, right? You're articulating those as part of your consideration. An argument from someone coming later saying, well, you did this for party A is much more easily defeated because your original decision was supported by those policy considerations.
That was gonna be my question is for like the public policy part is, you know, are we on solid footing saying it's a school and there's a use there? I mean, it's not necessarily, it's not a public city use. It's a charter school. It's technically a public school, but they still control what's done there, when and how, et cetera.
Correct. And one of Jonathan's recommendations, if you recall, was to make that a revocable encroachment. So if at any time we say, hey, our recreation areas is expanding, we're gonna need you to go put your retention wall in now.
Because what I always think is, all right, well, whether it's that canyon and slope all the way up, right, other things built, we're looking at Laguna, Malibu, et cetera, you're gonna have schools that wanna be built there, same thing, dumping into those areas. Like similar circumstances will arise as we build, so if we want to do this.
But again, if there's a reason why.
If we want to do this
think it's not a good reason somewhere else, we would just state it and not make the decision. You know?
There's going to be, the main thing, the only thing that fits to me is another school, right? And there's going to be more schools in the hills. Would we want to or let them do this? To me, the revocable part where we could come back and say at any time, okay, you got to take it out of there and put the wall in. I mean, is that sound? Will they be able to say, no, we can't afford to do that. We never planned for it. Like how, it's good to have that there, but really how enforceable is that?
I would include as part of that revocable permit a requirement that, yeah, they could bond. That might be, I wouldn't want to necessarily hold that money for a long period of time. But a requirement that if they don't, we would do it and they would essentially agree to some
Honestly,
form of a lien,
this
or,
is
you know, I don't know.
It's such a steep
it is.
hillside. It's got really, there's really no other use than a hill.
Right.
I mean, that's all it is. It's gonna be a hill. It's always gonna be a hill. Nobody's gonna do anything with it. We're never gonna develop it any other way. It's just a hill.
Well,
They're gonna change the slope of the hill, put more grass on it.
And they're going to build a soccer field in there, Jared.
So I guess the reason I bring that up is the same thing that we just discussed with the parking lot. And that was my concern was precedent setting, saying city property, it's changing use, changing ownership or whatnot. And so I do think it sets precedents. I do.
There will be similar.
Other than saying the reasons behind it, just like you're saying, okay, if we're going to agree to this, why are we agreeing to it? But I just think it's important, just like we did in the last one, to make sure those are very clearly articulated and listed, saying,
Agreed.
here's why we're doing it. Because I can tell you right at the end of 7300, go up the hill. We own the whole hillside right there. We will never do anything with. And so if I'm those property owners, I'm going to say, hey, if you're doing this, how about if you allow us to use this, right? Because we can have the same argument there. There is no purpose for that side of the hill at the end of 7300. I have no idea how that got given to us in open space, right? So, but as a property owner, I'm going to come and say, hey, what are you guys ever going to do with this?
Yeah,
right?
if somebody was gonna build an elementary school track and field
Right,
thing,
right.
and they needed to dump some dirt on that hill to do it, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm just
Bring it
saying,
to us.
I'm just saying that
Let's see
that
it.
it's just important to note that if we're changing use or we're allowing things that deviate, like, I think that's why staff said they recommend the other not to do it, is because it's deviating from our normal standards. So if we're deviating, it just has to be crystal clear why we're
Be very
deviating.
specific. The revocable thing, like I said, it makes you feel warm and fuzzy now, but again, just long experience.
Beat up a school
There's
to the
always
retaining wall
something,
in
there's
10,
always
20
something we
years.
miss. There's circumstances change, there's always something down the road. If you go to actually enforce that, is it enforceable?
Yeah, and
right?
sometimes
'Cause
charter
sometimes
schools
I
fiscally
can't tell how many
don't last.
times in 6 years I've sat here and said, wait a second, there was a clause in that agreement we did that says that if, and they come back and say, our people tell us, you know, we missed this, or we didn't think about that, or in this, we can't enforce it. It's in there, but we can't really do anything.
Yeah.
Right?
What's to the north of that, that impact there on the north end? Is there,
That's
that's
the
still a
school.
trail system?
On the south end?
To the
On
left
the
of the
left,
screen.
left of the screen.
Oh, that's an HOA community. I think there's a pool, there's a tennis court, I believe.
Yeah.
But that's the conjoint, that's the next property over, but
Yeah, in fact, I can.
Which is
probably-
interesting, because I was just thinking with Sherry's example, I'm like, I can, like, similar uses. So if you're saying that it's for recreation or whatever, it's not school, but an HOA could put in some sort of recreation thing and say it's the same thing. And, I mean, there's all sorts of things that would be similar. So while I understand with this one and even the parking one, like I said, it's easy to look at it in a vacuum and say, this is what this one is, but you really do have to think about the possibilities going forward.
Yeah, but I would say, you know, if another council in 20 years has a different opinion,
let them have it.
yeah.
But it's not about this council, it's about another landowner coming in and wanting
Yeah,
the same
but
thing.
the land to the left is already developed, it's already installed. The land to the south is owned by us, and it's gonna be there's gonna be a trail through there.
Steve, I'm not debating this one. I'm saying there are lots of other similar areas that are going to be developed in the city that we simply have to think about. I'm not saying I'm against this,
Yeah, I'm not either.
right?
It's
I'm just saying in general,
concern.
that's what we have to think about because we're going to see this again.
Is there any access or trail points from that area, around that tennis court and pool area? Is there any access points?
There is not. In fact, I take that back, but they've been kind of deliberate about trying to cut off trail access in our discussions with that particular HOA.
Okay. And that might even help with that, with the reseeding and revegetation of that area.
Yeah, there's a gap in the fence just north of the tennis court, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm not opposed to this either. It looks like this makes sense, but unfortunately, every time in politics, I think, yeah, that makes sense. There's 100 other reasons why you shouldn't do it, but it makes sense.
I think Steve's enunciated some of those
Yeah.
specifications that I think we're safe with.
Yeah.
There's no motion or anything,
There's
but
no
I'm
action on
supportive
this.
of it.
So, are we picking an option?
Yes, yeah, this is on for decision tonight.
So so we're looking for a motion on, is it a motion
That is
then?
my understanding.
To do it, then you don't need to make a motion. If you're wanting to grant it, then that option 2 would be your motion.
To grant the encroachment.
Do you wanna
So
go
we,
with the option?
we do need to,
Revocable.
so if that's where direction you're going, we need to motion, I need a motion then.
Do you want to go to the screen?
Yeah.
The options.
There we go.
So
Do it.
I can make a motion to allow an encroachment permit for, onto Harriman City property for Providence Hall Elementary School, correct? With a revocable encroachment permit to do the proposed grading, yeah, to the property in question. Do we need to specify
The use of what
the
they're
use
doing
of
there?
it?
Or?
It needs to be, because it's a school, do we need to specify those, or that's just part of the discussion?
You can, if you'd like to. Right, I mean, I think we've been presented with what their proposed use is.
Mhm.
You really have to discuss amongst yourselves. If that changes, does that affect your granting of that permit?
Yeah.
If the
Yeah.
ownership changes, does that?
Yeah.
And
Or the building type?
Right.
I might say,
'Cause that's the
it's
thing
a
with-
revocable permit, so if it changes, you could bring it up
Right.
at that time. I mean,
You
that's the beauty of if issuing.
we don't
a
need to.
So how
Revocable
enforceable is it? So, I mean, with this particular one, this might not be the case, but the charter school close to my home, the reason that they, and I'm told flat out by the developer and the property owner, the reason they chose that location is if the charter school fails, they can sell the building for a different use, right? So whether it's this one in particular or the next one that comes along, right? So what
What if we were
do
to
we need to do to make sure we get what we're being told
So
we're getting?
per the policy, this is a recorded document. So it'll be recorded on it. If they sell the property or something, they'll
Goes
see
with the
that in their
land.
closing statements.
Yep.
And
So
the
it
city
doesn't
could
matter,
then,
revocable covers this?
yeah, it's a recorded
It's
document.
recorded.
This is not something we're gonna hold, it's not a piece of paper we give them that disappears. You record it at the county. It goes on the property.
And that's a fair point. You don't have to specify all of those things because, again, we can put the language in there. I can put the language in there that states it really is revocable at your discretion upon so many days' notice. To answer Councilmember Henderson's question, you know, it's hard to have a crystal ball to say what the circumstances are going to look like that make that enforceable. Contractual provisions, by definition, are enforceable, but really it depends upon who the other party is that you're enforcing them against. What the circumstances look like at the time.
And again, not necessarily for this one only, but others, the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, if it's, in this case, it's school, if there's something that comes up where we need to enforce it, and they say, sorry, we don't have the money, because that's why they want to do this, is to save money, right? We don't want to build the wall and haul the dirt out.
Right.
Well, we come in and say, okay, you got to haul the dirt out, it's going to cost them a few $100,000, and they say, sorry, we can't. What do we do?
You would litigate that contractual provision, right?
What if it's still the school property, but they say, let's do a secondary outbuilding rather than the track and field, right? I mean,
Under what circumstances would we require somebody to go dig dirt out of a hill that's been revegetated and move it back onto their property and build a retaining wall ever? I mean, that's that's a preposterous.
I disagree. There's
Scenario.
so many things that have come back around just in my short time here. It's okay to have a discussion, Steve. I'm not telling you I'm against this. I'm not telling you that you're wrong. I think it's okay to discuss possibilities. Because I'm not thinking about.
And aliens could come down and
Steve,
want to build something there too.
Again,
That's a
there are so
possibility.
many, Steve, there are so many other areas in our city that are just like this, where yes, this exact same thing can happen, where the circumstances will be just maybe the layout and whatever gets built next, there might be something comes up. Like, there are so many things that I've sat here where we didn't think that the aliens would land, but they did, and there's nothing we can do, right? And we're looking at that point going, God, we should have thought about that. It's okay to have a discussion. That's what we're here for.
So Chase, are you okay with Sherry's motion where it's at then? Are you comfortable that we're protected?
Yes.
That revocable will cover us if we need to revoke it, and we'll have to go through the litigation process.
the language you're going to put in that revocable language will cover us so that we are meeting that exception to our actual policy.
If you're comfortable, I would actually prefer bringing this back maybe just on the consent agenda. I can draft the language, bring it on the consent agenda. If you have any questions or concerns about it, you can pull it from that and readdress it.
And I do want to clarify something, because I asked this question before. With this revocable encroachment permit, can we then require the school to maintain all grading and improvements on that? Or can we not? Because I wanted to make sure, are these mutually exclusive options?
And you're talking about the maintenance in perpetuity as opposed to the installation, correct?
Because you have an option 1 and you have an option 2. Option 1 has them doing all the grading and improvements.
Yeah.
Option 2 is the revocable encroachment.
Right.
What I'm saying is, if Sherry's motion is for a revocable encroachment, can we require the school to retain all the grading and improvements there?
Yeah. And
I would
in
say
fact,
whatever
that
you-
was their
That's their offer.
Their offer was, we will revegetate the area that we disrupt, and that would be a condition as well to say.
But is that offer contingent upon it not being revocable? Does that make sense? If we
I
make
don't
this
believe
revocable, are they going to back out of this?
I don't believe they've asked for it. They were planning to build the wall, so they're asking, can we do this? I don't know that they know what vehicle we would use to offer it to them.
Okay.
So you just make it part of the
Just don't
revocable
make it a
permit.
poison
They
pill.
decide.
They decide, yeah.
So should I
So I have
amend my
motion-
motion to table this?
I don't know that we want to amend it. I think we probably need
Your
to.
direction to me was to prepare an item to bring
So we need
back.
his direction. But I think Steve's point is good, because perpetual maintenance, I mean, if there's erosion that happens, right?
Yeah.
It's on our property. Do we have to fix it, or do they?
Yeah, I'll include that in the agreement.
What do we do with her motion then?
So,
Jackie?
you've not received a second on it.
So do we let it die? Is that, do I have a second on Sherry's motion?
Okay, no, it's fine.
Let it die.
Oh, what's your?
I was gonna say.
Give us a recommendation.
My recommendation would be that you vote to authorize staff to prepare that so that the council is on the same page with regard to moving forward in that direction.
So that's still a different motion though.
Do we need to vote, or we just
Her
give
existing
direction?
motion is sufficient for that purpose.
Or
You
do we
could-
just give direction for that?
I am so confused.
I know.
Yeah.
I'll let
Please
the
tell
city
me what to
manager
do.
weigh in on this procedure.
I would simply, maybe a motion such that direct staff to return with an appropriate revocable permit for council's consideration.
So that's
So
not her
moved.
motion then.
That's my motion. That's my new motion. Another one died.
Okay, so the original motion fails without a second. Sherry's new motion, Sherry has a new, I've got a,
New motion is
I've got a
what
new
Nathan
motion from
said.
Sherry, which is what Nathan said.
A second.
I have a second from Jared, all in favor.
Aye.
Is that good, Jackie? Are you okay with?
That was awesome.
I don't know if any of us are, so. Thank you, Jonathan.
You bet.
Move on to the final item on our agenda tonight, from the general meeting, item 10.6, a discussion and consideration pertaining to the Salt Lake County mask mandate. Nathan?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, this was a request. As you are aware, last Friday, the county health officer put in a requirement for individuals to wear masks within Salt Lake County. There's been a lot of discussion. There is a planned meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m. for the county council to consider this. They do have the statutory ability to revoke it. It's not clear that there are the votes to do that. And so there was a lot of discussion, and there was a request from council. We want to at least be able to talk about it. So we put it on the agenda. You can talk about it. You can take a stance. You don't have to take a stance. It's up to you. We just wanted to give you the opportunity, structured opportunity, to be able to have that conversation.
I think part of that request is stemming from some emails that we've received from city staff concerned about that mandate, et cetera. So I think it's good to have, maybe address it this way.
And I think that there's, because of a misunderstanding about our form of government, I know that Mayor Palmer's received comments or requests to make a statement similar to what mayors in some other cities have made regarding it. So
I don't know if we maybe need to turn to Chase and say, look, here's what you legally can and cannot do regarding this mandate, right? I mean, we can all make our own individual political statements or choose to as a body, I guess, but
I would.
The emails that I've received from people I've talked to are concerned and want us to do something about it. So maybe just on the record, clarify what this body can't do. Because
So it is a valid order from a county health official. And so that being the case, it is applicable to all residents within the county. The cities and the local jurisdictions are the ones being asked to enforce that. The only real control we have is with regard to enforcement, not whether we support it, not whether it should stand. We can have our own opinions on that, but with regard to whether or not it is a valid order, there's really no discussion for this council to have on that particular issue. So again, the only thing that it really falls down to is an enforcement.
we don't have the authority to change it. We don't have a health department to countermand what that health department said. Our police department, I would say, does not have the resources to try to enforce this. I don't know if the chief wants to speak to that at all. Because that's what the next question I've gotten from people is, well, what if I don't?
Our legal standard for enforcing it is the same as before, and that's the egregious or repeated offense. Give you the best example of that would be somebody intentionally going into a business, taking out their mask and coughing and projectiling saliva towards somebody. Even with a statement perhaps that they have COVID, that would be something we would take enforcement action on. However, we don't need this order to do that because that is unlawful anyway. So we haven't ever taken action in this regard. We didn't take it the first time we went through this. We didn't engage in stopping people to see if they were, had their paperwork for essential workers or any of those types of things. I don't see any eventuality where your police department would enforce this. And if there were such an egregious and repeated offense as the legal standard requires, the process that it would go through the police department is almost up to me. It's up to Zach Adams, the operations commander, before something could be done. So there's certain levels of supervisory response before we would take action. Does that answer your question?
That's fantastic.
And I think somebody intentionally walking in and trying to knowingly infect someone else with any kind of disease, that to me is much different than what we're talking about. Yeah.
Correct. And even if they did, we wouldn't need a health order to address that legally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly.
It would go beyond that. Currently, though, as Chase indicates, it is a valid order. It's a Class B misdemeanor to violate it, and then every subsequent violation for that person, that actor, is a Class A. But again, I don't know of an instance, certainly in this region out in the Southwest, where that was ever enforced. I can't speak for up north, but I'm unaware of any place out here that was enforced.
So for me there, I'll try to steer this into kind of two things, at least the concerns that I've heard from people, in my opinion, and then I'll be quiet. But I think there's kind of two things, at least for me, to address what we essentially can and can't do for residents, right, in our city. I think that's been spelled out pretty good there. I mean, for me, I've told people sitting next to me tonight, for me, this is kind of just a common courtesy thing. When I sat down in both rooms, I asked the people sitting directly by me, would you prefer that I wear a mask? If they would prefer I do, I will. But if you're going to tell me I have to just because I have to, then then we'll have a conversation. But the people right adjacent to me that have no choice but to sit by me would prefer that's the case, I have no issue with that. Somebody sitting in the back of the room that comes up and says, hey, put your mask on, and they run to the police department or call somebody, no, we don't have the resources to really enforce that sort of thing unless there's something like you had described. That's kind of what I would say, right? Is use common courtesy. When it comes to city employees, that's where I have to turn to the city manager, HR, and attorney. Like, what should we do? Here, my personal opinion is you've communicated what the health order is. I think we have responsible people try and set an example, but business as usual. I don't think we need to make a declaration or statement of anything. It's just, let's go to work.
And I would like to add to that. It's from the employee emails that we received and the direction. It's up to your direct supervisor on the enforcement education and practice, and HR and city manager. We would love to support you in our own personal views or political views on that, but it's not something that this body or that I can do, so.
And I would just say that in addition to that, if there is any employee or staff of the city that has any concerns about the requirement, and feels uncomfortable with it, it is not a binary choice. There are other solutions that can be worked out, and with your supervisor and HR, I think they can find accommodations and possibilities and creative solutions and ways to make sure that your specific needs or requirements can be accommodated.
Yeah, well said.
Let me add one more piece to that. This definitely does not need to affect your mental health, well-being, or your stress level. Please talk to your supervisor and HR if it's an issue. And like Steve said, there will be a solution of some sorts.
And if I could just say one other comment here. If there is anyone who feels strongly, one way or the other, they have an opinion about the wearing of masks and their virtue or value, please understand that there is one person who is responsible for that mandate, and perhaps a county council not reversing that. Those are the only people responsible for this. It's not school teachers, it's not business owners, it's not
your neighbor, it's not the guy.
This council, it's not your neighbors, it's not anyone else. And there is absolutely no reason or call for incivility or disrespect or abuse of any single person because they have a different opinion about it or a different level of compliance with the mandate. Be respectful, be kind, be polite, have good grace, be a good neighbor, and for goodness sake, don't verbally accost or abuse anybody because they're not doing it the same way you are. That's uncalled for in our city.
And if threats and harassment happen, we will respond to that.
So I gotta tell my kids, if you want your position or your opinion to be respected, you need to respect other people. I said, if I'm sitting next to someone and there's there's fear and anxiety there for a lot of people, right? There just is. That's what's driving on. Respect them, right? And if you have strong feelings, there's no reason to belittle someone else for their feelings. So, education, right? Be respectful. We'll all get through it.
I think that was the part that saddened me most about the effects of the mandate is it just brought back all of the incivility that was associated with the mandate in the first place. And it just, the hate and the anger towards each other is simply not necessary. There are people with differing views, and that's okay. But I agree with what's been said. We just have to try and just move forward, and we'll get through the next wave of this. It'll be all right. And as long as we can just be civil towards one another. Yeah, and I agree with the staffing thing. I would ask that we take into consideration people's strong opinions about certain things and make accommodations for that, because I know even at the county level they're not enforcing it, and it's their mandate. So I would expect that we can do the same here.
And let's be clear, the penalties for incivil actions are far worse than any penalties for not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
It's been brought to my attention, I should have mentioned this and I failed to articulate it. Businesses can ask people to leave if they're not wearing a mask.
Absolutely.
Private businesses. I do expect that we might see some of that. We did before, just a little bit. But again, I always mention this, in Herriman, we police ourselves very well. We are a very, very respectful community. So we just don't have those same problems, but a business can ask you to leave if you're not wearing a mask. And if they do and you don't, it is trespassing.
Sure, and I same deal, it's respect, comply.
Right.
If it's
Problem
their
is
private business.
there are people in our community who don't have that ability to say.
That is right.
Specifically school teachers. They don't make a call in their classroom.
Correct.
They may not even make a call at their school or even by the school board, right?
Yeah.
These are things that are beyond their control, and somebody calling up and berating a school teacher or yelling at them because their kid's wearing a mask, that is just so inappropriate and so uncalled for.
That's outside of their sphere of control.
It is
So it's
just stupid. And it saddens me to think that any parents would be accosting a teacher over this. Just don't do that.
And Steve, that brings up a good point on clarification. Other legislative bodies, such as the school board or school district, do not have that authority to override this either, or the testing requirements put on the state legislature. So those people are trying to do the best of their abilities that they can. But I know that a lot of people reached out to them as well of what they can and can't do, and they're just like our body. There's not much we can do at this point.
I think we're all trying to get through it and
I think we're all doing our best.
and be respectful to one another. Yeah.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, future meetings. January 20th, the Planning Commission meeting is 7 o'clock. January 26th, that's just a change from here. City Council work meeting 5:30. City Council meeting at 7. City Hall will be closed on January 17th. And that's all of it. We'll look for a motion to move back. Do we go to close first or back to the work meeting and then? So look for a motion to,
Make a motion to adjourn our regular city council meeting to go back into work meeting.
motion by Sherry,
Second.
second by Steve. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. Thank you, everyone.
Apparently half